and welcome to the Aspen Institute. My name is Mark Popovich. I'm with the Economic Opportunities Program, director of the rather new Good Companies, Good Jobs initiative. I've been chosen to quiet the room and start the session because I've started here December 1 of last year. I am pleased to be here this morning. This is a very important topic and near and dear to my heart, and some of the work that we've been doing. I will point out that I am the substitute for Maureen Conway, and I know many of you know Maureen Conway, and I was going to introduce myself as the pale and male substitute for Maureen. She's sorry she can't be here with you today, but she did ask me to send her regards and brief her when she's back to of what happened today. I am here representing the partnership in this program from the Economic Opportunities Program, which is a public policy program here at the Aspen Institute, which focuses on low to moderate income workers so that they can survive and thrive in our changing and often challenging economy. And I think given that my program is added now, I think we can say low and moderate income workers and their employers to what we focus on. And of course, this topic that we're looking at today is really key to that relationship and some of the challenges that are created within that relationship and some of the opportunities are there. We've been happy to join with the Financial Security Program. I'm not going to use the TLA, the three-letter acronyms, or the FLA, the four-letter acronyms, which are common across all of AI, a two-letter acronym. But we're happy to be here because of our common interest in this issue of work and wealth. Work and wealth, we often work in our silos, but we need to bridge those silos and bring the work together because it is an ecosystem, and while we might be able to keep the silos in reality on the ground, it's very different than those silos. So I do want to mention that the work that we're doing together and at EOP on work and wealth is supported by the Prudential Foundation. They've been a generous supporter, and we're appreciative of the support that they've provided and want to recognize them here. So we're here today to talk partly about scheduling, which is about time, and time is a physics thing. It can't be either compressed or expanded except for money. Money is time and time is money. And some of us have the option of being able to solve our scheduling problems with money, and some of us create problems for ourselves by having a lack of money or lack of resources. But it is a time and a scheduling issue that confronts all of us and is way more complicated if you don't have ample resources in order to try to solve those problems yourselves. You need a lot of help, you need a lot of assistance, you need some accommodation or recognition of that issue. We do work on these issues within ecosystems and have to think about them in terms of ecosystems. Public policy is an ecosystem, businesses are an ecosystem, and families themselves are ecosystems. So when we try to do something in one point, we have to think about both the intended and unintended consequences of that. And there's never always a simple answer that will be workable in all cases, but we are in strong need of solutions, and we have a great panel that's going to be talking about solutions today. Just one final note before I turn it over to my colleague David Mitchell. My work is around employers and employers' roles, and I'm particularly interested in the discussion we'll have today about the business case, where businesses and employers can gain by doing the right thing for the employees that we care about. So I'll just hand it over to David Mitchell. And
Thanks, Mark, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm David Mitchell, Senior Program Manager with the Aspen Financial Security Program. I'll start with the information that I'm sure everybody is desperately waiting for, the Twitter hashtag, which is Juggling Shifts. So please do join the conversation on social media. That goes for all the folks watching on the webcast as well. And if you'd like to get on the internet, there is Wi-Fi information on the agenda handout. Just to provide a little bit more background, the Financial Security Program at the Aspen Institute works to identify policies and products that would help low and moderate income Americans build wealth. So as you can imagine, we work very closely with Mark and the Economic Opportunities Program to pursue the two building blocks, as we see it, of economic stability and mobility, which are income and assets. So to that end, the Financial Security Program recently launched a new initiative called the Expanding Prosperity Impact Collaborative. EPIC is the acronym, which Ida, our executive director, came up with. And Joanna Smith-Romani, who's here in the audience, is the leader of that initiative and really gets credit for bringing it to life over the last year. Basically, EPIC shines a spotlight on one financial challenge facing families at a time, trying to investigate the scope of the problem and potential solutions. The first topic we chose was income volatility, so we're about a year into that process. You can go to aspenepic.org for the full array of content that we've already produced, but the Cliff Notes version is that it's a big problem facing a lot of Americans. It causes all sorts of difficulties in day-to-day life, meeting monthly expenses, saving for emergencies, planning for the future, among lots of other consequences. And now we've turned to solutions. So we didn't want to stop at diagnosing the problem. We wanted to work with our thought partners to come up with some solutions. We have a solutions framework that we put out in September, which is part of your packet, which was kind of an attempt to look at a whole array of possible responses to the fluctuations that workers are facing in their income from week to week and from month to month. And the next step is events like this one, which I'll quickly hand it over here in a second, basically pinpointing a specific solution like predictable and stable scheduling that we think is garnering a lot of energy from the public and private sector and deserves more attention. So there's lots of research that says that scheduling leads to volatility. There's also just common sense that hours fluctuate and so do wages as a result. And I think it's important to know that it's not just low-wage retail workers. 55% of all workers report having hours that vary week to week, and 43% say that they usually have less than 1 week's notice of their schedules. And that's all U.S. workers, not just hourly, not just retail. So it's a big problem, but we have big thinkers on the stage that are, I'm sure, up to the challenge of solving it. Before I hand it over to them, I do want to thank a few other folks. The funders of the labor market side of EPIC's income volatility work are the Ford Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation, and they help support this panel. EPIC's other funders are JP Morgan Chase and the MetLife Foundation. Also EPIC staff who helped produce the event. In addition to Joanna, there's Catherine McKay, Kiese Hansen, Pamela Hall, and Katie Bryan. And lastly, please stay tuned. We have an issue brief coming out on this very topic in the next few weeks, and we're going to be doing events and production like this, productions on other possible solutions in the coming months. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to FSP's Executive Director, Ida Rademacher.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
And thanks, Mark, as well. It's been one of the both most interesting reasons to come back to Aspen. 2 years ago next week was the opportunity here at Aspen to be a place that really does bridge the divide between work and wealth, that really explores the drivers of inequality and how income inequality and wealth inequality both have to be really understood as having common beginning points, but different solutions in some ways, and that we need to address both, and doing one without the other won't be far enough along. Welcome to the panel. I'll introduce you all as we go through. Just to put a little bit more of a frame even than David, EPIC has been a really exciting initial year for us. The idea that you look at a consequential financial challenge that's facing millions of Americans, synthesize the data to really understand what are the dimensions of the problem. Then we did entire surveys with pools of people around the country, experts, to see if we got it right, where the gaps are. And we did the same set of kind of polling and survey data around a solution framework. So when we talk about scheduling and as one of the solutions, it's not just us coming up with that in a room talking to each other. We had a very wide set of folks in convenings, in online Delphi surveys that said that, and the research itself that said that one of the primary drivers of income volatility is within job variation. And in the brief that will come out, we really parse that across 3 additional dimensions, which is it's variability, it's unpredictability, and it's the adequacy of the wage at the end of the day that comes from that leads to this level of precarity that's above and beyond the problems that we're familiar with grappling with around wage stagnation. So we think of low income stagnation of wages as the problem, but that's compounded when you end up with this level of work. So what we've done in terms of looking at the information, looking at the solutions, is really getting to this accelerator phase of EPIC where we want to talk about solutions. We don't just want talk, we want to really put a spotlight on actors in different sectors who are taking steps, taking leadership to solve the problem. And so that's really who we have on the stage today. And I'm going to, as moderator, not be hub and spoke. It's not going to be a question and answer where I'm going to ask each person a question. We're going to get into a dialogue. So just ignore us if we forget that you're there for a little while. We're going to get into a dialogue with each other. And we want you to formulate your questions. And we'll come around and spend a lot of time with the folks in the room. And if you want to tweet questions as well, please do that. We've got people looking at the Twitter feed as well on hashtag Juggling Shifts. So, so with that, let me introduce our panel. First to it's my left, I don't know who's, I guess it's your right, is Heather Boucher, who's a great friend of Aspen and also just runs the executive director of the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, and also its chief economist. And what I said to Heather early on is these days when I start looking at research that I think really nails a problem and gets a creative set of research to address it, I then look to see if it was actually funded by the Center for Equitable Growth, because now that the pipeline is coming to fruition, there's a lot of exciting work that she actually has a lot of the vision and the hands-on. So thank you for joining us on this particular topic. To Heather's left is Will Eady, who's the Vice President for Sales and Strategy at WorkJam, which is a relatively new company working on scheduling software issues. You're going to talk about it much more eloquently than me. And then prior to, I think, the startup of WorkJam the last couple of years, you were at Kronos, which is one of the other for an additional decade or so as well. So deep experience in the kind of software and the management, human resource management, and the role that technology takes in playing both positive and negative ways that it's manifest in terms of this issue, which we'll talk about. And then to Will's left is Laura Schock, welcome Laura, who is the director of the Associate Choice Initiative at Walmart, which if folks don't know much about this, is a pretty big commitment to really engaging employees, understanding the need for flexibility and stability in those workers, and what are some of the solution set that they would be investing in. And Laura herself, I think, started as an associate at Walmart.
Associate, yeah.
So bringing both a personal perspective and the organization's perspective to the conversation. And then last but absolutely not least is Ari Schwartz. Welcome, Ari, who is the lead organizer at DC Jobs with Justice, who is leading the Just Hours campaign. And we'll talk a lot about kind of why that campaign came to be. So if you look at here, we have technology solutions. When we talked about EPIC, we have technology solutions, employer solutions, we have government solutions, we have lots of input about who should lead on these issues. At this point, we're saying there's no right answer. Let's just get leaders committing to this work, and let's talk about that. But to get into the solutions, I actually want to stop and re-ground us a little bit in the dimensions of this problem and why we should care about it. So Heather, I'm going to turn it to you first to put the issue of unpredictable scheduling in the context of this income volatility question, but also in the context of this inequality question.
Yeah, thank you, Edith. I mean, this is a fantastic panel, and I love the way that you've organized it with the tech, the employers, and the policy solutions. So I'm really happy to be here this morning, and thank you for the nice compliment for equitable growth. That just I feel like I'm still blushing a little bit, but we've been working very hard on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that we released in September to ground this, and I want to note that my co-author, Bridget Ansell, is here in the audience as well, and I couldn't have done any of this without her. So when we're thinking about scheduling predictability, where I think you want to start is really putting this into its broader economic context. What does it mean to have workers who have these unpredictable, fluctuating hours? What are the broader economic, and then you can start understanding the social effects. So when we're thinking about the economics, let's kind of go back to the Econ 101 and think about the supply and demand. Okay. So on the one hand, when you think about the fluctuating hours, there's this presumption that employers are giving people unpredictable schedules because this is the only way they can either afford, or it's the best way for them to be running their business, right? So that's the first presumption. And I think starting there and understanding that there are while that may make sense perhaps in the short term, or it may kind of sound logical, there's a lot of empirical evidence that shows that that may not be the best strategy for every employer, and in fact may not be the best strategy for our economy overall. So let me give you a few examples. So people that work unpredictable schedules tend to have higher turnover, and turnover is enormously expensive for firms. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. While it's easy to kind of understand, it's sort of maybe easier to measure the week-to-week fluctuations in schedules, and you can kind of see that, it can be very difficult to measure the economic cost, either for a firm or for the economy more overall, of high job turnover. Because some of these costs are, they're touchy-feely, it's a little bit hard to measure. It's something like having a sales associate who's been on the floor for 3 years may be more productive because they're more invested in the product. They can sell better, or maybe they're more invested in the firm. But then there's also all these costs of turnover. You have to search for new employees, you have to train them, you got to do all that stuff, and I'm curious to hear from the rest of the panel about some of these issues. So there's these very high costs. So I think that's one place that we need to think about in terms of the demand, like why are we having these fluctuating hours, and what is that actually doing to the labor costs? In some research that we funded by Joan Williams and Susan Lambert, they've been going in and looking at, they've done a pilot inside the Gap to understand what the effects of unpredictable schedules are, and they're doing a pilot to look at what happens if they move to predictable schedules. What are the profit effects and other effects inside the firm? We started funding that work in our first round of grant making back in 2014, and a year ago, August, the Gap actually changed its policies to move towards more predictable scheduling for all of its employees, which kind of is messing up our study a little bit, but the researchers are powering through. But they made that change when they announced it. The Gap said that they felt that having more predictable schedules was actually good for business. One of the things that our researchers uncovered was that actually, at the end of the day, most people's schedules were the same 80% of the time, but they were just getting the same schedule at the last minute. And according to the researchers, this was something that managers were like, what? We had no idea that we were doing that. So actually kind of studying some of the impacts can help show companies what the business case is. So that's some of the demand and profitability questions. On the labor supplied and family side, because of course if you're thinking about the economy, you got to look at both firms and families. Families, households consume about 80% of what's produced in the U.S. economy, and of course that's where workers come from. For families, unpredictable scheduling has demonstrable negative effects on labor supply and on family functioning, which has implications for the next generation, for children, the well-being of families, marriages, and the like. And this is something that especially we as policymakers should be very concerned about. Because if individual firms are engaging in practices either because they might think it's good in their short-term interest, which may be debatable, their immediate profit interest, but if a lot of firms are doing something that's actually having a negative effect on our nation's labor supply, or on the ability of parents to stay married, or the ability of people to really be able to give children the stability that they need to grow up to be good adults, well, then that's something that we as a nation need to be concerned about, because that's about the broader economy. So there is research evidence that shows that by a couple of other of our grantees, Kristen Harknett and Danny Schneider, that shows that there are health outcomes, negative health outcomes associated with unpredictable and unstable schedules. And these filter through the whole family. There's also evidence, which is very hard to prove, but sort of more from not economic evidence, but more sort of sociological, anthropological, looking at families and how children fare in families when there are unpredictable schedules of their parents. And in fact, there are negative outcomes for children that are demonstrable. And of course, and we're going to talk, I think, a lot about on this panel, that hours unpredictability is associated with income instability, and that has effects on consumer demand and the consistency of consumer demand. It also has an effect on whether or not you can pay your landlord. And I think some people forget that some landlords are actually local business owners in their community. And so whether or not people can pay the rent on time is actually affecting their broader community and the ability to people to provide high quality housing. So when you look at both the supply and the demand side of the economy, looking at both firms and families, you see these negative outcomes from unpredictable scheduling. And I think we need to be thinking through that. I will say one more thing about inequality, which is that many of my comments, and I think probably a lot of what we're going to talk about here today, is going to be focused on workers at the lower end of the income distribution. We know that unpredictable schedules in terms of are something that is common among retail workers, hourly workers, food service workers. So this is certainly an issue there. But I think we also want to remember that this is an issue that actually goes all the way up the income spectrum. I don't know about you, but I certainly have had weeks where I did not know what my schedule was going to be on Monday morning going through the week, and there's lots of unpredictability and fluctuating hours. Now, of course, I have the resources to deal with that with my family. I've got a lot of flexibility. I can pay for longer care or whatever it is that I need if I had children, which I don't, but I could do that. I can negotiate it with my husband. So I have a lot of resources, but that doesn't mean that it's not stressful, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a negative effect on families. Again, one of the things that we know about marriages and about families is that you got to see people for them to work. And again, I'm an economist, so this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I hear from other people that, that part of what makes families function is that having that time together. And if unpredictable schedules and unstable schedules makes it impossible for families to actually have that family dinner, have that sacred family time, that may be, and I think there is evidence from sociology and other literatures that this is having an effect on families more generally. So this goes up the income spectrum, and I think, while I think our focus here will be on the low wage, I do want to just sort of note that this is not only a low wage issue.
Yeah, no, it's great, and thank you for that. I think, it seems to me like there's a parallel issue with uncertainty here, right? You hear one of the big arguments that industry will make, firms will make in terms of regulatory. So we need certainty to make investments. We need certainty to plan for the future and to do things. And you're seeing in this case how families lacking certainty might not be able to go back to community college, might not be able to figure out childcare. So there's a lot of just direct implications here. One of the things we saw in EPIC was that this volatility issue, income volatility, has actually grown a great deal over the last the last couple of decades, that there's a pretty long-term growth of that. And I wanted to turn to you, Will, to talk a little bit about the role that technology has potentially played in exacerbating the ability to, I think it's an unintended consequence, quite frankly, but I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the history of how the technology role in creating volatility, but then pivoting to the technology potential for solving the problem.
Absolutely. So first of all, I think Heather did a phenomenal job of framing the topic, and I think talking a lot about what everybody is speaking about at all levels of this discussion. And I think there are people on both sides of that are taking active roles to try and solve this, and bringing it to light today, I think, really helps that. Really well framed, and I think it also echoes. I spend my days kind of meeting with retailers or large hospitality companies or dining companies who are all, like you said, it's not just the retail worker, it's not just at the Gap, it's kind of all across those, or even into healthcare or any of these other places where you have a lot of the hourly workforce, right? It's very affected by this. So I think the history of technology is it's probably too long for the hour and a half that we have, but and I've been unfortunately been in this space for maybe too long. But I think what the problem, sort of, to give the short version, is as technology emerged, in the late '90s, retailers have always done scheduling, right? And they've always done, time and attendance is the basis of this. And I think, Mark talked about this a little bit. Which is the simple punching in, punching out. This is when I started. This is when I left. And that's sort of I speak about it because it's the genesis of all the problem, right? Like this is where they all have to start to make sure we're collecting time. And I always make the joke, like, having sold these solutions for years, that most retailers just think when you turn the lights on in the store that time and attendance is sort of there. Nobody really knows where it came from. Nobody really knows how they implemented it. It's just the operators just think, well, it's there. Someone punched in, someone up back at corporate's going to pay them, and now we're going to try and sell stuff in the store. So I think whereas technology emerged was people tried to solve that problem a little bit better. We had client-server solutions in the late 90s where something happened at each of the stores that got pushed back, maybe overnight or the next day, very slowly back to corporate. The problem, kind of a math problem, occurred, and we spit out data, and then we looked at it a week later and said, oh, did we meet our budget? Did we miss our budget? How do we fix that? And then we're just looking at time and attendance data. Sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s, you emerged to someone saying, hey, there's probably a way to use some really great algorithms. Everyone talks about like the Holt Winters algorithm, all these different places to solve these really complex math problems, to say, we have our forecast, this is what we think we're going to do in sales. We have a budget, this is what we have to meet to make sure that we're not blowing our budget on payroll. And if we can solve that problem in an advanced way, now we can actually schedule better. So let's take that schedule, let's see what shifts we should build, and let's try and fill those in. As you did that in a client-server way, it was a little bit difficult, because if you had 1,000 stores, you did it at 1,000 stores, it iterated back up into a bigger problem. And if there was a mistake in 40% of it, it messed the whole forecast up for everybody, or the budget up for everybody. As technology evolved into web-based solutions, sort of late 2000s, 2005, that got a little bit better. You got back to being able to do it centralized, which I think made the technology better, but maybe exacerbated this problem that you're talking about today, because you took some of that flexibility from a manager in a store and took it up to somebody centrally, who again wasn't looking to do anything evil or to try and put volatility into the workplace. They were just solving the problem that they were given. And so technology maybe, like you said, exacerbated the problem a little bit, because we got too good at optimizing, we got too good at this. But what the real problem that came from that is we solved the scheduling problem, we solved the time and attendance problem, but we didn't solve the availability problem. And the availability problem is, I get hired to work at a store, and I say that I'm available Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and and you kind of have, because somebody has to build a schedule, you have to sort of give a guaranteed availability. So you say, I can promise you, I can always work from 8 to 4. A lot of retailers try and be really good, and they say, give us your preferred availability, and when we can, we will try and schedule to that, but these are the hours you promise us. Well, if I get hired in December, I'm probably off school, or my kids are home, so I have a little bit more flexibility, or less flexibility, as it were. And then 6 months later, when I talk about technology exacerbating the problem, we never thought to ask for that availability again. We never thought of what's an easy way to collect that availability again. We're collecting it via paper, probably written on a Post-it note on a back wall that falls off and gets lost under the desk, or and then you have an overwhelmed manager who's got 40 employees that just told you they have a different availability, and it doesn't get entered into the system properly. So I think what you're seeing is, schedules are only as good as your availability. And when I talk to retailers, we have this conversation all the time. Having worked in selling optimized scheduling for years, I go back to meet with clients, and they say, like, our schedule's broken. I say, well, your schedule's not broken, your availability's broken. Like, you can't put a shift where you don't have somebody that can work it. Now, that gets sometimes blamed, well, our employees need to give us better availability, or we need to demand more availability, where the real issue is, do you really know what their availability is? Because when Heather originally gave me her availability, she had class on Tuesdays. Well, she no longer has class on Tuesdays because it's the next semester, but we never collected that, and we never thought. So now Heather might be missing out on a shift that she could have had. The retailer doesn't get a schedule that's as good as it could have been, so now both sides sort of lose. So I think that when we talk about today, how can technology be part of the solution? We now have a much more, when we talk about WorkGem, we do what we call employee engagement, which we think really is a whole gambit of bringing the employer and the employee together to communicate in a much better fashion. It's very difficult technology-wise to communicate with thousands upon thousands of frontline workers. You don't want to give them a corporate email. There's a lot of personal device rules about not collecting. We don't want people text messaging people, because what does that add to their cost? So it becomes really difficult to communicate with them. So if you can communicate in a better fashion, which technology can enable, then that's how we really start to give the voice to the employer or to the employee, and the employer, the voice back down so that we can start that communication process. And if we can start to solve the availability problem, we do a couple of things. The employer still gets to meet a budget and a forecast, which so now they can have the money to pay and increase payroll and hopefully increase wages. And as well, the employee can now say, I'm getting the shifts that I asked for. When next week my rent just went up, maybe now I can figure out a way to put my availability so I can pick up a little bit more shifts. We see a lot, because of enabling technology, we see a lot of employers these days being able to broadcast the idea for new shifts. We've seen over the past few years a lot of legislation pushing down the ability for employers to do things like on-call shifts, like everyone probably had if they ever worked in retail, where we don't know if we're going to need you on Thursday, but be available in case we do. So once again, you're kind of sitting around going, well, I can't make plans, I can't do anything, and then we don't need you or we do need you. So that's kind of gone away, especially in New York and California and other places that have legislated it. But what that did was two things. A, it took a shift away from an employee. Right now, it was at least 50% of the time I was getting that shift, so now I'm missing out on that opportunity to earn. And in the employer, if sales are growing for the week and they really needed that shift, they can't call that person in. But what technology can do is allow them to look at that schedule, and in real time, because we have so much mobile technology, I can broadcast that shift and say, hey, anybody that is available to work, please, and you meet the needs of this shift, pick up the shift, and now you can get the extra income, and now we can fill the demand for the schedule. So I think as technology has changed over the past 15 to 20 years, we're in a place where that communication can really enable a very collaborative approach between both sides. So,
I think thank you. And I think one of the things you said that struck me early on, and what I think is a really helpful kind of layout of the evolution of the technology driver of the issue and potential solution, is that people were solving a problem, but the problem they were giving was a very one-sided. They were optimizing on one side of the demand and supply equation. Laura, you're working at Walmart on solving a different problem. You've redefined the problem, at least for a piece of your organization, your company. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit, and we're going to get into kind of the carrot or the stick reasons that employers get into this. I'd love to know a little bit of that for Walmart, but also, how did it come to be that you're solving a different problem than optimizing just for Walmart's cost structure? Or are you? At the end of the day, is it a win-win?
It's a really great question, and thanks for having me. We're excited to be part of this discussion and leading in this space. It is an interesting question, is how do we arrive at this focus on scheduling? And we arrived there by listening to our associates. Our associates told us that this was a problem for them. When we looked at the opportunity agenda, there's many pillars, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. And what got the most press, of course, was the investment in wages, right? Because that was kind of the leading edge piece of that. But to your earlier point, that's only one piece of this very complicated puzzle, is the wage piece. Because you can increase the wages, but if you then don't have enough hours, then it doesn't really provide a benefit to the associate. So, and we looked at these things collectively as one giant puzzle to solve, and what were the pieces that we could put in place to really make a difference. So one of those obviously was wages, training, so the skills, right, to be able to do the job and feel confident in the job that they have today at Walmart, but then be able to grow either with us within the company, or to take the skills that they learned at Walmart and grow their career somewhere else. And then, of course, we honed in on scheduling, because they told us that the way that we scheduled at Walmart wasn't meeting their needs, and we recognized as a business, so that's the A, we kind of have this ABC thing going, that's the associate piece. And then for the business, we recognized that it wasn't working either, because we're introducing all the time new offers, right? New services, new technology, as our customers' needs and demands are changing. And so we recognized that how we manage schedules played a big part in the results that we see in the business. And then finally, customer, so the C part of that, the solutions, all of the solutions in this space have to meet the needs of the associate, the business, and the customer. We were talking earlier about the impact to the customer and how do you make that connection. Well, if I'm stressed out about not having enough hours or not knowing when I'm going to be working or not being able to look into the future and say, am I going to be able to pay the deposit on such and such bill or send my kid to this camp or whatever that might be, shop for back to school, then when they come to work, maybe they're less likely to be engaged with the customer, or maybe they're going to call in or look for another job, right? So it goes back to the absenteeism and turnover that really is a cost to our business and does directly impact the customer. And so that, at a very high level, and I'm oversimplifying it because it's incredibly complex and you have as many stores as we do and such an amazingly diverse associate base, and all of their needs are different. It's a huge and complex problem that we're working to solve. And truly, availability, the way we talk about that, it's truly a transformation for us in all things what you could consider workforce planning. And it goes down to, it goes back to not just the offer. So as an associate, some of them may very much like to have a consistent schedule and that predictable paycheck. And maybe that schedule looks like 40 hours to them, looks like 40 hours for them. But to others, they're in school and they need more flexibility. And maybe they're, going back to complete their education. So a minor, right, is one scenario that's fairly complex. And then you have someone who is a non-traditional student, or someone who is retired, right, and looking for just a little bit of supplemental income. So we recognized very quickly that in this complex problem, there was no like peanut butter spread solution. There is no silver bullet to this. You have to consider the needs of again, that associate business customer, and that's what we're working to do.
And we'll stay high level in a lot of ways just because this is such a complex thing, but this is not happening in all your stores right now, right? This is happening in some of the smaller stores. And it feels like you've got a couple of kind of rails, if you will. So you're setting predictable schedules, you're creating flexible schedules, you've embedded technology to make this happen.
Yes.
It's been a process to get here.
Again, it is.
And you don't have data yet in terms of the outcomes of this.
Yeah, it's an incredible undertaking. We did lead off, as we typically do at Walmart, by implementing the program in our neighborhood markets. It is fully rolled out to all of our neighborhood markets today. Implementing the technology was, again, one of the most complicated pieces because you can imagine moving away from what we consider to be legacy systems into something more leading edge, and was a huge change for our organization and a huge investment as well. So yeah, we're starting there. And the offer, I think, I'm a little bit biased because I look after the program, but I actually think it's pretty cool from an options perspective. So we can provide some of our associates with a predictable schedule, consistent paycheck. I know as long as my availability rings true and doesn't change, that I can plan on having those hours, not just the amount of hours, but the time of day and day of week. And that's just as important. It's not just that, okay, I can plan on 24 hours or 34 hours, but it's that I know it's going to be Monday, Friday, and Saturday, and I can plan my life around that. On top of that, they layer on. So that's the first piece, the consistency piece. If you have that offer even, there's the opportunity for more, either by getting additional shifts through the auto generation process based on your availability. So the system may see that, yes, you've got this commitment schedule, right? But you're also available on Wednesday, and we have a shift then, and you're willing to take it, and it will auto-assign it, and there you go. You've got an additional 8 hours. You don't have to do anything. So that's one way. Or we have what we call unfilled shift, because there is always some variability in retail with the hours. You can't fill all of them all the time. But the associate on their own can go out and claim those shifts all the way up to, and build their schedule all the way up to 40 hours, regardless of their status, so whether they're full-time or part-time, because we as a business are saying, we know we have work to get done there. We've got to be ready for the customer or there for the customer, and we won't be taking care of those needs for the business or the customer if someone doesn't work this shift. And so we'll let them go out there and pick it up on their own.
Great.
So the options layer on. It's back to that not one size fits all.
Yeah.
It's about options for us.
And I think I'm going to finish the linear progression, and then we're going to bring it to the round here, because I know people are writing down notes. I mentioned going into that, and that's super helpful, Laura, that the carrot and stick version of this. Certainly when we did EPIC, the expert panel 86% of the response was that employers are the most natural solution source to the issue of predictable scheduling. But only 13% of people thought that they were the most likely to actually act. So there was a huge variation there. Part of that was because of maybe the lack of what really would compel them, And part of the stick part has been that, something that people mentioned earlier, has been that there has been more campaigns at the local and state level. There's been, this has been a greater understood issue. There's been a lot of pushback to what are the rights of workers, what are the needs of workers, what are the needs of communities for predictable schedules and strong families. So I wonder, Ari, if you might say a little bit about the just hours work and how it connects to this, and a little bit of, where the fit is. We'll all talk about this, because I think the role of employer, technology, and policy in this is going to be the dialogue we end up having in some degree. But I wonder if you might say a little bit more about the reasons. And I would also say that government and policy was across the board the place where most people in our surveys with EPIC landed in terms of could act and should act, to help address this problem. So I wonder if you might say a little bit about the work you're doing.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Well, I wouldn't characterize it as a stick. I mean, we want to talk about setting new standards. So I would say that.
Binaries, carrot sticks.
So what we do at Jobs with Justice is support working people in organizing for these solutions that impact them in their own lives. So I figured I would just start by bringing a couple people into the room today that we work with every day, who I was with yesterday. And one is Chad, who works at a Dunkin' Donuts in DC, and he opened the store. It's a franchise, and he was opening the store working 40 to 50 hours a week. And at that time, he said to his employer and to the company that he wants to make a career out of Dunkin' Donuts. He's a DC native. Now, fast forward 7 months later, he's still employed there, but he gets 0 hours a week. So he goes into work and says, am I fired? Am I still employed here? They say, yeah, you're still employed here, but you're just not on the schedule right now. And so it may seem like an extreme example, but believe it or not, he's not an outlier. We're seeing lots of people who start at a certain number of hours who want to be full-time, and as they spend longer and longer at that company, their hours are suppressed. Another story that I would tell you is about Stephanie, who works at a Marshall's downtown. And Stephanie is a mother, and she wants to be a full-time employee at Marshall's to bring home a bigger paycheck, but she's caught at 20 to 25 hours a week. And those hours fall on different days of the week, every week. And she gets her schedule on Saturday or Sunday for the following Monday. So these are two examples of how this shows up in people's lives in DC. We work almost exclusively in the District of Columbia, but we hear that these are the stories that are coming out of places across the country. So I don't want those to seem like an outlier. This panel is about solutions, and so we have a couple of ideas about solutions for this, and I think I'm hearing there's kind of 4 categories for that. There's the role that technology can play, which has made a lot of exciting progress, and there's the high road that employers can take for it to be a win-win for their profitability and for their employees. And then there's 2, I'll let Will and Laura and Heather talk about those. There's 2 possibilities that we really focus on. One is the role for government to insert itself and set a new standard with the issue of hours and scheduling, and we see that as an urgent need. And the other is for more unionization and more collective bargaining of workers with their management around this issue. And we see that latter option as the only true way to solve this problem. So first, just to touch briefly, I know we're going to get into a discussion here, but with governments playing a role in this. So the Fair Labor Standards Act has governed wages and hours and pay for more than 80 years, but has not been updated. Municipalities and states have moved to raise their minimum wage and to enact sick leave and to talk about hiring discrimination. But we really haven't touched the issue of hours and scheduling. But we've heard, from Will and others that this has been a huge change in optimization in the industries that are affected by this issue. And so our laws and our standards haven't caught up with that. And so the real thing that should happen is that federally we should have an update to those standards. And so in the meantime, we're pushing on municipalities and states to really tackle that problem. And so there's a few places around the country that have taken this on: San Francisco, Seattle, San Jose, Emeryville, California. It's clustered on the West Coast for now. But I really think that you're going to see this go to more and more places, more cities and states in the next couple of years, even this year. I think New York City is on the verge of passing a new standard when it comes to hours and scheduling. I think you'll see Oregon State pass this to be the first state. And then before long, the District of Columbia looks like is adapted from the practices that many of these companies have instituted themselves. A fair standard for a government to set is to, hey, if you have a qualified employee who wants more hours, you should make available hours open to them if they're qualified and able to take that shift. And that's actually a practice that we're excited to see is being implemented in many employers already without a government mandate. Another standard that governments should and could set is that schedules have to come out 14 days in advance, or I don't know what the proper window should be for all industries, but to set some bar for when a schedule should be posted. And that too is a practice that has been adopted in dozens of companies, especially in retail in recent months. So we really see the government needing to play a role here because we can't afford to wait for all companies to move this forward and to get to the place that some leading companies have gotten to. In the meantime, there's an urgent need in people's lives to have hours, to have stability, and that's the role of our legislatures is to set those standards. And so the last thing I'll say before we move on is the only true way to solve this problem is to give workers a real voice in their workplace so that they have control over their working lives and their life outside of work. And in our paradigm of the United States, the only true way to do that is to have collective bargaining and have a union that represents you that you can take control of. And so in industries that have higher unionization rates than in retail, retail's about 5% union nationwide, which is heavily clustered in the grocery sector. In other industries, say the hotel industry, they tackle this problem through their union contracts. If there's an issue with scheduling, that's resolved through the union management collaboration and partnership. And so for us to put standards in that are really meaningful and that are enforceable and accountable, we really believe that has to be through workers organizing themselves.
Thanks. I'd invite you all to comment toward each other. I'll certainly have one, but I know you've been writing a lot, Heather. So I actually wonder if I might just invite you to reflect on some of the things you're hearing here, starting out, and then you all, no need to raise hands. Don't elbow each other, but go ahead and jump into a conversation.
Yeah. Well, so I just wanted to comment on a few things. First of all, this has been really fantastic. Something that Will said. I think it's very interesting. So. As an economist, when you study economics, one of the biggest things that when you first start studying economics and you're reading the textbook, and they talk about how a competitive market works, and that is that everyone can kind of voice what they want, and so that you can match people's needs and you can match supply and demand, but you have to have information about what the demand is and what the supply is. And I think this is such a fascinating case study about important ways that you talked about, Will, to solve what we would call an information asymmetry, right? Only I know my true availability, but if I can actually keep telling you that, and you can find a way to then integrate that in a way that works, that's a massive win-win and a real economic efficiency gain. And and then the things that Laura, you talked about, and then kind of pivoting off of what Ari talked about, that what that technology allows us to really deal with it is that there isn't this one-size-fits-all. And that's a really important thing to note about schedules, right? So I think Ari was the only one to bring up the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act outlaws child labor, sets a minimum wage, and it gives overtime rules that say if you earn less than this, or there's a bunch of other really complicated rules, but just mostly if you earn less than X and you're an hourly employee, then if you are working more than 40 hours a week, there's a cost sharing penalty, right? So that if you work somebody more than 40 hours a week, employers can work you 80 hours a week if you're an hourly worker. There are no rules against it, but if they want to work you more than 40 time, right? So that's a way of cost sharing because people sort of rose up their hands and say, oh, long hours, that's a burden on us. So I wonder if we can take some of these ideas and fit them together, but that we need business by business, industry by industry, and often employer by employer or specific place. You need that flexibility to do schedules. But I think Ari brings up some really important points about, well, what are the basic rules? Just like with the overtime regulations, like what are the basics? And maybe for 2 weeks, maybe that is too hard for every business. But can you come up with something where then the cost is not continually only borne by workers and their families, because not just the worker, it's also their family that bears the cost, and find some way to do this fairly, but building on top of, can we find ways to make these easy win-win technology solutions available to every business? I mean, I want to know why every business isn't already doing this. I mean, what you guys are talking about is so smart. So why are so many firms not doing it? Maybe you can't speak to your colleagues because those aren't the ones that's not you, but it really does. But yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to put
Sorry.
I think, I think a lot of people are trying and are getting there, right? I mean, there's technology, right? We always talk about it. It's a savior and a burden, right? So there's technology in all of these large corporations now. And some of that is stuff that it takes a very long time, especially for older technology, to be replaced. It's not like you can just it's not like downloading QuickBooks yourself and you're implemented in 2 minutes. We're getting there, right? Cloud technology enables us to implement, in months, whereas before it was years. So that's helping. And I think, I very happily am very busy and on the road constantly speaking to people, so they are talking about it, right? Everyone's trying to do it. Maybe I'll take a little bit of the predictable scheduling, and can I get my schedule 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out? There's some phenomenal retailers out there right now that have committed to getting it out there 3 weeks out, and that's very difficult for them, because you got to think about how much seasonality and how many different things affect a retailer's business. It's something as easy as a snowstorm means that no one's coming in that day, and I have all this labor in the store, and a lot of them are willing to absorb that. It's something as small as a water main broke, and now no one can get into the front of the store, and I can't predict that 3 weeks out. So what a lot of those ones that are really doing a great job of it, they're saying, we're going to release your schedule 3 weeks out, and we're going to do that in a way where we're not going to tell you you're working Tuesday from 4 till 8. We're going to say, here's your base schedule, and you're a 40-hour-a-week employee. We're going to give you 20 hours of business of hours that we're pretty certain are going to happen no matter what happens to our business. And we're going to put open shifts out there for the rest of it and let you choose it. And that really allows them to get that balance between the employee or making sure that their business needs are met, that all of it happens, or that if the business really rises, that they can add new shifts and again give you the chance to pick those up without saying, well, geez, I now have to cancel a doctor's appointment because I was scheduled for something I didn't know. So that's how they're using technology to kind of get something 3 weeks out. Now, the downside of that, I guess, is a little bit of, I only get 20 hours guaranteed and I have to go pick up the extra 20 hours. But the research that we're doing and the people that we're partnering with are finding that hands down, all of their shifts are being filled. Like, there was this large fear probably from employers, if I put open shifts out there, if I let people pick their own schedule, what happens when no one picks it? And I think a great test for that was just this past year with Black Friday, right? Mm-hmm. This is a one where no one wants to work, or you hear this that no one wants to work, and this employer that I'm thinking of released their Black Friday schedule like 6 weeks out. They didn't assign any of the shifts. They gave it to hundreds of thousands of their employees and said, you pick if you want to work. 4 weeks out, there was no shifts left available. It was completely full. So what you had was everybody that was there that day, and you and I were talking about this, wanted to be there. So I wanted those extra hours because Christmas was coming, and we talked about income and volatility. Now I can get all of those hours. I'm probably getting time and a half that day because it's Black Friday and it's a holiday, and I picked to be there. So now I'm highly engaged. I've communicated it. I've chosen to be there. Now the customer experience goes way, way up because it's not the 5% of people that are really ticked off that they got scheduled on Black Friday and didn't want to be there. They're home with their families where they want to be. So I think that's a great place where the marriage of a really active employer that wants to do the right thing and technology comes together. And I think and I'll turn it back over, but you talked a lot about the voice of the employer or availability. The other thing that here is that you talk about training, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing that technology can enable now that it couldn't even do a year ago, right? One of the things that because we're a very heavily mobile platform, which means that everybody can use it, right? And as much as a year ago we thought not everybody had smartphones, especially in retail. They all do. Like even the people that think that they don't have smartphones in their stores, they all do. But so you can enable training. Like we enable the ability for somebody to roll out a training so that if I'm a cashier, but I need to pick up more hours, maybe I can take a short training mobily to become a stock associate. And now I know that's in my profile, and my availability can be different for each. Right, so my availability for a cashier and my availability for a stock associate can be two different things because one might always happen on Sunday nights or whenever you're moving top stock, and one happens a different time. I might be able to manage my availability between two different locations because I go to school here in DuPont Circle, but I live across the bridge in Virginia, and so my availability is going to be very different between those two stores.
That's great. Laura, I want to make sure that we connect this back to your, the ruling point is collective bargaining, but I think for you, what we're seeing is an emergence of additional employer voice, employee empowerment. This information asymmetry is maybe a good frame for this. What's your sense?
Yeah, I think back to one of the earlier questions on why aren't more people doing this like naturally, and to tag on to what you were saying is it truly is an investment. It is viewed initially, I mean, especially when you're talking about technology and that we're leapfrogging in a lot of cases, right? It truly is an investment. And the business case for that, so we talked about for us, Walmart, the business case for the associate, the business and the customer is solid, it's firm. We know these things will drive value, right? But it takes a while to prove that out. And so when you're in a business like ours in retail where return on investment is key, a quick return on investment in some cases is key, those are challenging decisions that we have to make. And I think that Doug did a really great job when he rolled out the opportunity agenda, and as he's been talking to the street and investors and saying, this truly is an investment and you need to be prepared for the impact in the short term to the business results and the perception around there, but these are the steps that we have to take to be stronger as a business in the long term. So those are challenging, and I think the last point, if I could make really quickly, is that I think in some cases, some folks are watching Walmart and what we're doing to see how we can drive change, and we know at Walmart when we do it right, and lead in these spaces, it will drive change throughout the industry. And we're very much aware of that. We're to some extent proud of that. And we hope that what we're doing will spur some of these organizations on to either start having the conversation if they haven't. But to your point, a lot of them have, and maybe it will motivate them to move a little bit more quickly.
What strikes me as what is fundamentally part of the change you're talking about is a paradigm shift from seeing labor primarily as a cost center, which I think, and you've done a lot of work on this area in terms of the bifurcation of the labor market, Heather, where there is absolutely for skilled workers kind of a way that you see employees not just as a cost center, but when you kind of move down the wage structure, but it's also different in different industries, right? There's a bifurcation even within industry of who actually is still working with an old paradigm model of labor is cost center and cost center only versus investment kind of coming into the mix.
Well, and what I think is very interesting about what we've heard is that the idea that workers having voice, not in sort of the traditional union sense, but literally having a voice and saying, this is what my schedule, like that actually can make you more money. Right? And this is what we've known from research on unions for a really long time, is that when done well, it can be a win-win because the workers are, they're the people that are actually doing the work, and that can have really positive productivity gains, while at the same time making sure that people's rights are protected and that they're getting what they need. But one of the challenges, and I think this is why the information asymmetry is so interesting, is that in the absence of unions, most employers, unless they really go out and search for it, they don't know what their employees think. And unions have traditionally provided that mechanism and when Ari talks about they're collectively bargaining, what he really means is that oftentimes they're doing surveys of, hey, what are the employees complaining about this week? What's actually going on? What do you need to do your job better? How can we make that work? And unions traditionally provided that service. And I think it's interesting to see that in the absence of that, employers have to do it themselves. So, but you want to make sure that people aren't penalized for saying, oh, I want this schedule. And that's where really making sure that workers have rights to that voice are so imperative.
Well, Ari, I want you to weigh in on it, and then I want to ask a group a question and then open it up for discussion with the audience. So
Sure. Well, as to your question about why aren't more firms doing this, and how do we get the sector as a whole to move in this direction? I mean, I think that there are many firms that have been thinking about this and moving on it on their own, or finding that investment in their workforce and dealing with scheduling is a good thing for their bottom line. But I wouldn't underplay the role that the workers themselves and governments and attorneys general have played in moving companies in that direction. And so that's part of the reason why we think it's so critical that cities and states move this forward and continue to push for standards, whatever they may be. I don't think we found the right municipal policy yet for this. It started in San Francisco with the omnibus package of lots of different policies, and people are still perfecting what that could look like, an update, as Heather implied, to the Fair Labor Standards Act. But I do want to be clear that in DC and in other places, companies haven't been a friend to updating those standards. They haven't been willing partners in getting cities to find the right package. It's the opposite. They've stood in the way. And in DC, we saw a furious lobbying effort from lots of companies, including Walmart, to block this from moving forward. And so we're excited about progress being made by companies moving this forward for their own reasons, and we're going to encourage that. But we would also challenge them to meet us and meet policymakers at the table and come up with what is the right package to move forward legislatively so that we can have multiple solutions moving this forward at the same time for a problem that we all agree is in crisis.
Thanks. I want, again, if you're watching live stream, there's a Juggling Shifts hashtag, and you can send in a question. We'll be looking for those, and people in the room can think about their questions. I guess I want to bring this back around to where we started. The reason the financial security program picked income volatility as a financial challenge is because of the systemic ways that this level of financial precarity is playing out with systemic outcomes in the economy, both for families and for businesses. And we also thought that we wanted to make sure that once we understood and scoped out the scale of the problem, that the scale of the solutions we want to put forward have to be in the same ballpark, right? So scheduling is one of those places. If the majority of income variation, families' experiences, is within job income variation, some of which is owned and wanted because they need that flexibility, but much of which is maybe not wanted. So I guess my question to you all as we move into the audience is this a solvable problem? And what is the most singular barrier in the way to solving it that you see in the next 5 years?
Income volatility itself?
Well, I think the scheduling piece. If we're looking at this solution feels like one that is sized to the scope of the problem. Mm-hmm. Is this ultimately a solvable problem? Can we look 5 years in advance and say, we really have the set of stakeholders and shareholders leaning into this problem and making it less of a measurable problem?
I certainly think so. And I mean, I think that one of the most exciting things is that you are actually seeing, what is really exciting about this panel today, and I hope a lot of people are taking note, that this is an area where even 5 years ago, we would not have been sitting here, right? This is one I've been following for a long time and been so excited to see the change, both increasing private solutions, increasing technical solutions, and we've got new policy solutions, which folks like economists like myself and the people that I work with are actually out there studying so that we can see what the effect is on all of these. So that is actually, I think, the first step to having a problem be solvable is that you have models that you're testing. I hope we were collecting, a plea for collecting enough data on all of this and doing the research so that we can come back and say what works and what doesn't. And I wrote, actually, the last note I wrote down was Ari saying, we haven't found the perfect municipal policy. I'm sure those people that worked really hard on the ones that have been passed were like, no, what we did was perfect. But we know that we have a lot to, because this is new, it's a new way of doing it, we have a lot to learn. And so, but it is, I think that it is going to be solvable because we are seeing people taking action and having an effect. So I predict that predictable schedules will be something that we really see a lot more movement on solving over the next 5 to 10 years in the way that we have on other issues that are sort of in the same ballpark, like around paid sick days or paid family leave, where we've seen this enormous progress. So we're starting to see this here as well. So.
Others, just quickly, solvable, and one of the either biggest barriers to that or the thing that's going to make it solvable for you.
So I think it is. I think it is solvable, and actually, I think
Questions after this, so.
Ari made a great point in that, you asked what's going to drive it, so I'll tie it to what he said. I think actually employees themselves are going to drive it more, and again, to tie it back to technology, but there's, I talked a lot about, and we talked a lot about enterprise type technology that's driven from the top down. I think what you're seeing popped up because technology's become the great integrator, that there's all these little tiny free apps and things like that that employees are doing themselves to get this voice, to trade shifts, to do these things. So what that's going to do is that's actually, I think, going to force those that aren't having this conversation, those large employers, to say, well, if we don't do something that integrates our needs and the employees' needs, they're going to do it all themselves, and then nobody's going to get what they want, because if it's not integrated and it doesn't work, then it can work one-off, but in the long term, it's not deployable. So I think the employees are doing a great job of saying, hey, we have a voice, technology is going to enable it for us, you better listen and do something. And I think that's going to drive the tension out of the conversation, and that it can be solved.
Great.
Yeah, I think we'll all agree that this is a problem that we can solve. I mean, I feel like at this point it's almost my life's work, and one of the most important things that I'll do in my working career, something that we should do. I think as far as the biggest problem or some of the biggest challenges for us, I think it's the ability to move more quickly, right? I think that's definitely a challenge for us, and it will be for others, because it is new, and just wanting to make sure that we meet the needs of our associates as quickly as possible, but that we introduce the right solution. The worst thing that we can do is introduce the wrong thing quickly. So we're continuing to have to challenge ourselves, like, internally, to strike that balance. And then finally, I think looking a little bit more broadly, it's making sure that we don't, through policy and other areas, drive complexity into this and put too much pressure in those spaces to where you end up with a solution that doesn't work.
So I think that well, for us in looking at this problem, there's kind of two areas to it. There's schedule and income volatility, and then there's just the core issue of, do you get enough hours? In other words, do you get enough income?
The advocacy issue.
Right, and is the job that you have in retail or another sector a sustainable, livable job for you? And so I'm optimistic that we can solve the first problem of the volatility, and I look at the momentum of the fight for 15 in the last 3 years. Talk about what we said on the stage 5 years ago. Would anyone 3 years ago think that this many places would have a $15 minimum wage? I don't think so. The bigger problem, in our opinion, though, is just, can you have a livable income in these types of jobs? And we think that the answer urgently needs to be yes, and we need to get to that solution. And 5 years is a small window to bring that huge sector of our economy into a good jobs standard.
Yeah. Thanks. Let me move to the audience, and thank you again. We'll come around and do all the things, but really great ideas. Lots of hands. I love it. I'm going to go to Amy first, and then I'm going to hit this side and then this side. So let's start, and I'll come around the circle. Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for Laura. I'm Amy Blair with the Aspen's Economic Opportunities Program, and you've talked about the technology approach that you've used at Walmart, but I'm imagining that there are all kinds of other types of changes that you've had to implement in the stores where you're piloting this, and Will touched on a couple of things. Similar to scheduling not being a peanut butter kind of approach, I'm assuming that employees have different types of skills, you have different types of jobs, managers think about the mix of employees when they're putting together a schedule and who has what strengths. And I'm wondering what other types of investments this has meant in terms of management and training and things to make it work so that employees can take more control of their scheduling.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right that this is, again, a massive undertaking. And for us, the end result and what you're seeing right now in our neighborhood market stores is the introduction of new technology, a new scheduling system, a new platform, and ultimately the output of that is a different scheduling offer for our associates, right? And that's all that you see. But I can tell you that behind the scenes, upstream, for quite a while, we have been working to transform the back-end processes that enable us to deliver these options. And you'll know what I'm talking about in detail, but it goes from everything to how we identified the work that's in the stores, the workload, what is your demand, what is the offer, the merchandise offer that you have there, or the services that you offer, and your operating hours, and all of that. When does the work need to get done? How long is it going to take? Who needs to do it? And then aligning your budget budget to that as well. That part was a transformation for us as well. And then you now lead into your other point about the change management piece and the training. Just for the management and the leadership team alone, learning a new system is one thing, but changing those behaviors related to some of the legacy processes we had were definitely a challenge, but necessary, right, that had to be done. And that, I think, goes back to the comment that I made about the time that it's going to take us to get there. It's not just the system and it's not just the output, it's everything that goes into running that side of your retail business. That is truly complicated. I'll make one other point, like even about the workload, right? None of our stores are the same. They all have, it says Neighborhood Market on the outside or Walmart on the outside, but the offer is just a little bit different. The area in which they operate is just a little bit different. The square footage, the type of fixtures, the type of flooring, all of that goes into workforce planning. For us, then you multiply that by 4,000 some odd stores, and it's a huge investment of time and energy. And again, going back to the pressures to deliver the results to the business is something that we have to strike a balance on. But it's, for us, very much a worthy endeavor and an exciting one, but definitely a lot of work that has to go into it.
Let's grab a couple of the questions because there's so many. So let's go from the back with the white shirt, and then in front of him, and let's hear all three questions, and then we'll grab them in. Sorry about it. I'm mindful of our time. We have plenty of time to get to them all, but I just want to make sure we hear a few.
Hi, Ida. I'm Renee Bryce Laporte. I'm a consultant in DCA, and I used to work here. I work on a lot of rural issues, and so I'm going to direct to Laura, but others might have a comment. Is the dynamic different or challenges different in your rural locations as opposed to your urban locations, if you could speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to the store type. I kind of focus on that initially, right? What's in the box, and then you talk about the area, what's outside of the box and the area in which we operate. Is it an urban center? And the considerations there from a workforce planning perspective and an associate needs perspective are, of course, very different compared to what you would find in a store in rural Iowa, for example. So that definitely has to be considered, and it definitely influences how we manage those processes in those areas. But there's a unique distinction based on the geography, yeah.
And let me, since we went ahead and started answering that one before taking the rest of them, let me ask Will if there's, for you work with a number of different employers.
Yeah.
Shell, you've mentioned lots of different geographic contexts for that.
Yeah, I think it changes there's two places it changes, right? Like every area is going to have different legislative needs. I mean, something as simple as like Tennessee has very different minor rules than Massachusetts has, right? So that's another part of the problem that she has to take into when she plans her schedule. But then it's also something that's a little bit more soft, which is in the city, I have to probably make sure I'm giving somebody a longer shift and giving a lot more planning, because it might be more difficult for them to get there. Whereas in a very rural area, like they can leave 10 minutes before their shift starts and be there. So the planning for the employee becomes very different as well. And really great employers like Walmart take that into account when they're planning shift lengths, when they're planning how far apart shifts have to be. So that changes a lot between a rural and an urban area.
Great, so let's grab these other two. I'm coming right to you, sir. Yep, go ahead first.
Hi, Catherine Harvey with the AARP Public Policy Institute. My question builds on the last one, and that is there not potentially an unintended consequence that flexibility actually favors more flexible workers? That is to say, workers who don't have childcare responsibilities, or in the case of AARP, I would think of someone with maybe adult caregiving responsibilities who can turn on a dime and take those evening or overnight hours. How do you deal with that? Or first of all, have you observed that? And how do you manage for that?
So let you guys think about that for a minute, and I'd love to hear your question as well, sir.
Yeah. It's Carl Polzer, and I'm with the Center on Capital and Social Equity. I'm going to start. Ari kind of was going down the road that I'm thinking about. So when we look at what people make and whether they can afford to pay their bills, it is an important issue for policymakers is also the composition of full-time and part-time work. Because with full-time work, you get benefits and you get civil rights protections. And if one thing to watch for is if the move towards predictable scheduling lowers the norm to below the full-time level, might be an issue there. You might have to then redo the carrots and sticks and different policies to be prorated or to be, with the Affordable Care Act, 30 hours, so will you get your health benefits? In other words, if you two minimum wage salaries, it's $29,000 a year. For half minimum wage salaries, same thing. You'd have a different set of benefits.
So this is great, and we have about 5 minutes, so I want to hit this. These are both somewhat about unintended consequences of solving one problem and creating a different one, or shifting who the problem is vulnerable for. Did you have a question that connects to that as well?
Kind of.
Okay.
Mike or no Mike? Oh. Brian Head, Small Business Administration. I'm a little surprised the solution didn't come up like when we look at airline on-time schedules, and when we look at Dun & Bradstreet supplier score for businesses, we look at best employers. So we didn't hear like a Monster.com survey that said how good a company is at scheduling. Like Dunkin' Donuts is going to get dinged on this. So the employees have some information that they are, maybe Walmart is good, because I think looking at a federal data solution in this environment may be unrealistic, considering the way I understand it, the executive branch right now is smaller than Walmart. Of course, the government is a rule setter, but we are in a certain environment where maybe some shaming and lauding data is a better solution than to kind of expect each municipality to solve things.
And to that point, and I'll come back to this question, we did actually, it came up at one of our meetings, this idea of transparency. If the data is now available, can there be a way for individuals to look at what are the firm by firm kind of outcomes on is there a set of metrics, and is there just a transparency aspect to this, which again would contribute to reducing the information asymmetry in terms of choice and maybe drive some of that. But I want to talk a little bit, I want us to maybe not end on this, but almost there, this unintended consequences, either that flexibility actually favors people that can be flexible, or that this composition of kind of, does it actually tamp down full-time work? Because you can now control the part-time variability. Any thoughts on either one of those, or other unintended consequences of solving this one problem and maybe creating a different, greater one we haven't thought about?
I would just lift up the example of Costco to that point about the mix of full-time and part-time work. And Costco's often looked at as an industry leader and how they treat their employees. And there's a lot to that, because they have a split 50-50 full-time to part-time workforce. They guarantee full-time workers get 40 hours a week. They guarantee that part-time workers get 24 hours a week. And then they give an opportunity for part-timers to move up to full-time if they want. And so I think there's a lot of unanswered questions about what would happen to the 40-hour work week. And honestly, the 40-hour work week in retail doesn't really exist anymore for many places. And so I think that, as thinking about solutions and thinking about what policies and what the goal we should aspire to be, I think we should aspire to get to where something like Costco is.
I think a couple of comments on this front. I think the easiest way to say it is that we're watching this very closely, and we understand that there could be unintended consequences. And going back to the earlier point about we've got to strike a balance across the hugely diverse associate base that we're proud to work with and that I come from. And we've got to strike a balance there, and that's something that we're working to refine and prove out in the neighborhood market pilot that we have running right now. Definitely aware that it's got to be structured correctly and, again, meet the needs of all of our associates. We're proud of the fact that we offer a path to full-time for part-time associates today, and that we have a majority full-time workforce, but we're also, again, very much aware that not everyone is looking for full-time, and that we have to, again, balance the needs and meet the needs of those associates as well.
Great, thanks. Will, any final thought
I'll
about
try
this?
and tie the three together. I think you asked about flexible workers, can they maybe get less hours? I think as retailers get more flexible and the option to maybe offer completely open shifts that people go pick themselves, then I think that those less flexible people get the opportunity to take what works for them. And a lot of retailers can even do, those less flexible people who they've guaranteed 25 or 40 hours to maybe get to pick first, right? And then the flexible people, the students, can work around that. I think from the standpoint of what you talked about, and this is probably a much longer conversation, I think what you're talking about leads to the idea of what you hear a lot about with the gig economy or the Uberization of labor, which is what you're going to see down the road is, and again, technology can enable this to be beneficial to both, is that maybe now I can use technology to manage my hours between two different employers so I can get 40 hours. Obviously there's implications still, like you said, with ACA, and technology manages those as well, and great employers do that. And then the last thing, and while I don't know we have time to get into the data, I think a lot of data is being built around and being shared around this idea that highly happy and what we call engaged employees actually lead to a huge amount of growth. And I think Mark and I talked a little bit this before, which is the idea that really smart investors that are investing in retail now are actually starting to look at the labor force as a part of what they're making their investment on. Do you have happy employees? Because it actually really leads to the street being happy as well. So that data does exist, and I come from the standpoint, let's hold up the bellwethers as opposed to shaming those that aren't doing it well, because I think they'll follow. And if you help them increase sales, they're all going to do the right thing as well.
And we have brought back to retail a lot of times, but hospitals, others, lots of, this is happening across the board in a lot of different sectors. Heather, any additional, from an economist perspective, unintended consequences?
This is, not to sound like a researcher, but this is these are enormously important opportunities for us to be doing research on what's working and what isn't, and that's how you get to understand what these unintended consequences are, because you have to evaluate them. So I would really stress the importance of making sure that we are being vigilant, and that is not just a little add-on, but it's an important part of how we're thinking both about the private and public policy solutions. And I think your point about the kinds of data that we have access to that can give worker/consumers information about either where they're shopping or what kind of firm they are joining is important. I think that it's a little bit hard when people are when they need work. And so the idea that it's acceptable from just speaking with a policymaker kind of hat on, I think that our goal should be to make sure that every job is a good job. And so while I think giving people information is important, but I kind of think of that in the long list of things where it's like the vegetarian walks into the steak restaurant and they walk out with a meal that they thought was pretty bad, right? Because they just ate the weird lettuce from the salad bar. That's not really a choice. And so if you're giving us all this information, yes, this did happen. But if you're giving people a bunch of information, but they still need a job and none of these are good jobs, then you do have to have a mechanism for that information to actually create good jobs for people to have. And again, just sort of with pretending to be a policymaker, that seems like something that we really need to hold near and dear. Important as that information is, and as great as it is to have.
There'll be some time out back for people in the room to have continue conversation with some of the speakers. We're going to wrap it up for me with a special thanks both to Mark and David for opening this, for our speakers and to kind of jumpstart this conversation, which is really important. For us at EPIC, it's the first of many of the solutions we're going to be putting a spotlight on in the next couple of months, with a brief that comes out with each one. Yeah. This is really delving in, as we talked about, to how might you reduce volatility? And then there's a lot of financial solutions about how do you help people manage volatility. And both of these have policy implications, private sector implications, and input from multiple stakeholders in terms of kicking the tires on these solutions. So thanks for starting us off with all of that, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.